You probably haven't even noticed it, but you likely use at least one Nestle product in your daily life. From the water you drink, to the chocolate you eat, all the way to the formula given to newborn babies. It's everywhere. What once started as a small Swiss company has grown into the largest food corporation on the planet, a multi-billion-dollar empire built on decades of relentless global expansion. But over the years, Nestle has been at the center of some of the most disturbing controversies in modern business. All over the world, Nestle has faced some serious accusations, from being linked to infant deaths in developing countries, to the exploitation of something as basic as water, and the use of child labor within its supply chain. And yet, the company still continues to grow like nothing happened at all. Sitting on supermarket shelves around the world, profits soaring, and connected to over 2,000 brands you may know and love. So what really happens behind one of the most powerful companies on Earth? And how much do people actually know? But to understand it all, we have to go back to where it started. In the mid-1800s, Europe was undergoing rapid industrial change. Cities were expanding quickly, living conditions were poor, and as a result, infant mortality was extremely high. It was noted in studies at the time that many infants died because some mothers couldn't breastfeed, or the babies were unable to tolerate the milk, and there was no safe substitute. This is where German-born pharmacist Henry Nestle comes into the picture. Henry wasn't born into wealth or anything remarkable. In 1814, he was born in Frankfurt, Germany, as one of 14 children. He came from a working-class family of glaziers, people who cut glass and install windows. But Henry thought differently. From a young age, he was drawn to chemistry and just loved everything about it. Despite his family not supporting the idea, by the age of 15, he left home and moved to Switzerland to pursue his interest, becoming an apprentice pharmacist for the next 4 years. For years, he experimented with different chemical processes and tried multiple business ideas, ranging from oils to mineral water. Success didn't come easy, but in the 1860s, an opportunity emerged where he noticed the high rate of infant mortality. Using his knowledge of chemistry, he began studying the composition of breast milk, working day and night until he finally developed a solution. The first substitute was created, a mixture of cow milk, wheat flour, and sugar. Simple, right? This product would later be known as farine lactate. At first, his invention wasn't seen as a business opportunity, but rather as a solution to a life-threatening problem. What started as an experiment in a small laboratory in Vevey, Switzerland, would eventually grow into the largest food company in the world. Shortly after the creation of farine lactate, the product began gaining attention from mothers in the area. More and more cases appeared where the formula helped infants survive, and the reputation started to grow. It wasn't long before the product began gaining attention outside of Switzerland, and soon enough, Henry Nestle's small invention was turning into one of the most popular products at the time. But Nestle wasn't the only one that saw this gap in the market. The Anglo-Swiss condensed milk company was also developing products around the same time, with similar goals. They aimed to increase the shelf life of milk and created condensed milk, which offered a practical solution to fresh milk that spoiled quickly. This created a competitive environment, and both companies were forced to expand and enter each other's markets. Nestle also began producing condensed milk, while Anglo-Swiss moved into infant food. Despite this competition, Nestle's growth remained steady, and by 1875, Henry Nestle decided it was best to step away from the company. He sold it to a group of local businessmen who saw the potential for expansion. From there, the company began to scale, hiring chemists and increasing its workforce to meet growing demand. It's still surreal to think that all of this came from one man working in a small laboratory. Nestle was no longer just a solution to a medical problem. It was becoming a structured business, one that would later be at the center of some of the most controversial cases in modern business.
Die eine Anschauung extrem, würde ich sagen, dass Wasser zu einem öffentlichen Recht erklärt wird.
By early 1900s, Nestle had expanded even more, and had also merged with the Anglo-Swiss Condensed Milk Company. This merge brought together two major players in the dairy industry, and marked the beginning of Nestle's rise as a global force in food production. Fast forward to the early and mid-20th century, the company had become embedded in the daily life of every family throughout Europe and North America. Its products were available everywhere, while Nestle's influence in the food industry continued to expand. However, by the mid-1900s, the growth in these developed regions was beginning to slow down. The demand for certain products, especially infant formula, was no longer increasing at the same pace as it was before. So, like many other large corporations, Nestle needed to find other ways to continue expanding. And as a result, Nestle's focus shifted to markets beyond what they had already dominated. the company started looking at parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, regions where the population was rapidly growing and birth rates remained high, thus meaning there was a market for this infant formula. On the surface, it seemed like this made sense, right? These were markets that clearly needed the baby formula and demand was there. But at the same time, these regions had very, very different conditions to those in Europe and North America. Often, access to clean drinking water was limited in most areas, and the healthcare systems were often underdeveloped. To add on top of that, the education levels varied in these regions, and many communities didn't have access to medical guidance. Despite all of this, Nestle started to aggressively market infant formula in these regions, showcasing it as a modern, scientific alternative to breastfeeding, something more advanced, and in some cases, they said it's even better than the normal. Over time, reports began to pile up, stating that these marketing practices weren't always straightforward. There were claims that free samples were being distributed to mothers in hospitals, so they would be forced to keep buying the product to feed their babies. What made this expansion into these areas even more concerning is the environment at which these products were being used. As stated before, most of the time clean water wasn't always available, so prepping the formula could become dangerous. And without proper sanitation, the risk of contamination increased significantly. Because of all of this, they started to face criticism from health professionals, activists, and international organizations. In 1974, a British charity called War on Want published a report titled The Baby Killer. This report investigated how the infant formula was being marketed in these developing countries, and it raised several serious accusations against companies like Nestle. It claimed that this aggressive promotion of formula was contributing to illness and infant deaths in poorer communities. Of course, the issue wasn't really the product itself, but how it was being used. Infants became more vulnerable to all types of diseases and infections because of the lack of clean water used in prepping the formula. And this report quickly gained attention, especially after it was translated and distributed more widely. In some versions, it was given an even more direct and controversial title, Nestle Kills Babies. And their response was taking legal action against the publishers of the translation. The case went to court in Switzerland, where Nestle technically won the lawsuit. However, the outcome wasn't as clear-cut as it seemed. The fine imposed was minimal, and the judge stated that the company needed to fundamentally change its marketing practices. Although Nestle may have won the lawsuit, they have not won the war. The heat around them was still rising. Consumers across multiple different countries began avoiding their products, and suddenly a large-scale boycott was starting to form. Its main focus was stopping the promotion of Nestle's baby formula in a way that discouraged breastfeeding or affected the baby's health. As the pressure grew, the international health organizations began to take this issue a little bit more seriously. One of the most significant responses came from the World Health Organization. In 1981, they released a set of guidelines that was designed to regulate how infant formula could be advertised and distributed globally. This was aimed to prevent companies from promoting formula as a replacement, especially in regions where formula could be unsafe due to poor sanitation and limited access to clean water. The code's restrictions are as follows: no advertising of infant formula directly to the public, no free samples given to mothers, no promotion of formula within healthcare facilities, clear labeling stating that breast milk is the best source of nutrition for infants. So this should stop Nestle's indirect advertising, right? Well, kind of. Nestle started to put labeling on their baby formulas stating that breastfeeding is the better option, but not in all countries. Some parts of Asia and Africa still had unlabeled products, and some quote-unquote healthcare workers were promoting them. This created an ongoing debate around whether the changes were truly effective, or whether they were simply adjustments in how the same practices were being carried out. At the same time, Nestle continued to expand as a company. It moved beyond the infant formula into a wide range of products, including bottled water, chocolate, coffee, and processed food. Its global presence continued to grow, and its influence in the food industry became even stronger. As a result, the controversy surrounding infant formula did not define the company entirely, but it remained one of the most significant and widely discussed issues in its history. However, the controversy surrounding Nestle did not end there. In the years and decades that followed, criticism began to shift towards other parts of the company's operations. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, increasing attention was being placed on the global bottled water industry. Nestle had become one of the largest companies in that space and had started acquiring rights to extract groundwater in multiple countries. In a few cases, this extraction took place where water was already a limited resource. Local communities and activists argued that the large-scale water extraction could reduce access for nearby residents, bringing in concerns about sustainability and fairness. The issue was not just about the act of extracting water, but about whether essential natural resources should be treated as a private commodity.
Let me make it clear from the beginning. I have always supported the human right to water, but not to fill a pool or wash a car. There is a difference.
At the same time, another major concern was developing within Nestle's supply chain, particularly to do with cocoa. Throughout the early 2000s, reports began highlighting the widespread use of child labor in cocoa production across West Africa, especially in countries like the Ivory Coast and Ghana. In 2001, Nestle, along with other major chocolate companies, signed the Harkin-Engel Protocol, an agreement aimed at eliminating the worst forms of child labor in cocoa production. However, progress proved to be slow. By 2005, lawsuits were filed against several companies, including Nestle, accusing them of benefiting from supply chains linked to forced child labor. Even into the 2010s and beyond, reports continued to highlight the scale of the issue. Millions of children were still involved in cocoa farming, with many exposed to hazardous working conditions. However, the complexity of global supply chains has made it difficult to fully eliminate the issue, and criticism has continued from people who argue that the progress has not been sufficient. By this point, Nestle was not tied to a single controversy, but instead it had been associated with multiple issues across different decades, each one raising questions about corporate responsibility and global influence. From the 1970s infant formula controversy, to water extraction concerns in the late 1990s and 2000s, to ongoing child labor issues in the 2000s. And yet, despite all of this, Nestle has continued to grow. Today it remains the largest food company in the world, with thousands of products sold across nearly every country. Its brands are embedded in everyday life, often used without second thought. And that's what makes the story more complex, because Nestle didn't start as a company built on controversy. It began in 1867 as a solution, a product that was designed to save the lives of infants during a time where mortality rates were dangerously high.